Welcome to EDUC 640 Balanced Literacy Presentation on Differentiation, Multiple Intelligences, and Understanding by Design. Parts of balanced literacy and best practices connects to differentiation, multiple intelligences, and how you create lessons and units. In this presentation, I will provide ideas and procedures to incorporate this into your teaching situation. Included are also some personal ways that I have used these ideas to improve my practices to best accommodate my learners. Differentiation, how to meet the needs of all learners, exploring where we have been and where we are now. Carol Tomlinson is an expert on differentiation, and these two quotes I have taken from some of the books that I have read from her. In differentiated instruction, teachers begin where students are, not where the curriculum does. Fair is when everyone doesn't necessarily get the same. Fair is when everyone gets what he or she needs. It's basically about providing options and various activities to reach all learners in multiple ways. And I really like that second quote. I've used it with students, not word for word, but when they notice that the student next to them may have a different assessment or they may have a different activity to complete, I always say, fair doesn't mean equal. So-and-so needs this so that he can learn best. This is what you need in order for you to learn best. And typically they are satisfied with that answer. The definition of differentiation is a philosophy that promotes growth and successes by incorporating the growing research on learning, as well as recent research on brain, multiple intelligences, developments in authentic assessment, and constructivism. It's not about creating an individual IEP for each student. It's finding out what they need, how they best learn, and providing a multitude of ways to learn and demonstrate their learning. Not every lesson needs to hit all multiple intelligences, but providing enough variety throughout your unit to reach all learners is the essence of differentiation. There are three main learning styles, and I make my students aware of this very early on in the year, that I am, with every unit that I teach, I am trying to support these three main learning styles. So your visual learner learns best by seeing. And that means using colors. I use color as much as possible, having them use highlighters, drawing, types of visualization strategies. In my room, students use highlighter tape to highlight certain pieces of the text that they want to remember or they can connect to, or parts that were confusing for them. My anchor charts are in color. When I do a shared writing of our argument papers, I do it in two different colors to show the different parts of our essay, to show the introduction, the body paragraph, the conclusion. My agenda will often be written on the board in different colors to show the different parts of the class for the day. In their reading portfolio bin, students have particular colored folders to help them remember where to put their work. For my different units, I have different colors coordinated with those as well. My survival and action adventure unit in the beginning of the year, everything is done on brown. Then when I move on to my fantasy and my mythology unit, everything is on purple. And then my social issues unit, my human rights unit, everything in that unit is all done on blue. So that helps them to better recognize what it is they need to do and remember, oh wait, that doesn't go with this unit. Everything is purple this time. And it helps those visual learners. And obviously using videos, pictures, multimedia types of presentations with my visual learners. Auditory verbal learners learn best by hearing or speaking. So that works well with lectures, songs, discussions, debates. Doing a lot of that think, pair, share, conferencing, shared reading and writing think-alouds, student think-alouds, teacher think-alouds, music. All of those are ways to really reach those auditory and visual or verbal learners. Your kinesthetic or tactile learner learns most by doing those hands-on activities, giving them opportunities to manipulate, moving while they're learning. So it could be a skit that they create, a clap routine. Once you're done with your mini lesson, getting up and moving and going anywhere in the room, using the fist to 5 formative assessment, thumbs up, thumbs down, Those types of things help those kinesthetic and tactile learners.
When we think about the gradual release of responsibility, it's all about getting students to become independent by guiding them through their learning and actually practicing the skill or strategy. This graphic represents the way most people learn. To truly learn and understand, the breakdown goes as such. People remember 10% of what they read, 20% of what they hear, 30% of what they see. So overall, they remember 50% of what they see and hear, 70% of what they say, and 90% of what they say and do. So that last part, the saying and doing, is going to make the most impact. And if you think about it, the structures of best practice emulate this. There are 7 distinct types of multiple intelligences according to Howard Gardner of Harvard. These intelligences are created after cognitive research was conducted to learn how students' minds work to remember, learn, understand, and perform. Another aspect of balanced literacy in Allington's 6 T's to support differentiation, since one size doesn't fit all. Multiple intelligence differentiation can be used in workshop models as well as utilizing best practice principles. Many types of surveys can be found on the web to figure out the type of learner a person is according to their multiple intelligences. Don't overwhelm yourself trying to meet all the different intelligence types, but if you can reach students through the 3 main styles mentioned previously, you'll reach a majority. However, when creating projects and assessments with choice involved, weave in the different multiple intelligences. Your logical and mathematical person learns best through logic games, investigations, mysteries. They like puzzles and experiments. Your visual spatial learner is typically learns more through drawings, models, graphics, and multimedia avenues. Your body kinesthetic student works best when there's physical activity involved. The hands-on type of learning, acting out, role-playing, drama. Your musical person studies better with music on. They oftentimes can turn lessons into lyrics, helping to remember information. They learn with tapping alongside of information and rhymes. Your interpersonal student learns best through discussions, group work, and conferencing. Your intraperson works best through independent studies, and those are your most independent type of students. Your linguistic student learns a lot through word games, reading, and writing. Successful differentiation. The key is to really know your students. Use that data. Give out those surveys, multiple intelligences, likes, dislikes. Have discussions. Create a classroom community. That is so important at the beginning of the year. And as you notice, that's part of that collaboration, having a classroom community. Use benchmarks, progress monitoring, look at reading logs and inventories, do a lot of conferencing, taking anecdotal notes and observations. Look at your differentiation through your exit slips, and then put it into effect in your summative and formative assessments. You can't always differentiate all the time, but make sure that students are getting their information in at least more than one way. So for example, when I do my word work, I say the word, I have the word displayed, students write it down, then they see a picture so they can make some connections. So they're writing, I'm talking, I have them think, pair, share to try to guess what the word might mean. During the novel units, I have them stopping and jotting. I have varied written or drawn responses, and I give them choices sometimes on how they want a response, where I rotate the roles so that they do a different type of response every time. And then look for that student growth. Use the data to see how kids have grown and grasped the concept and skills. And then either incorporate that type of method of introducing and teaching students, or try a different way if you see that your data is telling you that the students aren't getting it. Then maybe you need to vary the way that you are delivering your instruction. How do teachers differentiate? There are 2 different ways to differentiate. You can differentiate based on the skill or knowledge that you want students to understand. It is all the same focus, but it's delivered and shown in a different way. Think about it as a bullseye. That middle area, the bullseye, is your focus. That's that need to know information to understanding the skill or knowledge. And that is going to be your main focus. And hopefully the outer edges of your bullseye, they'll receive was what I like to call the nice to know information. And hopefully you'll be able to have students that are able to connect to that information as well. So your main focus will be the critical skill, concept, or knowledge, or your essential learning outcome. And there are 3 different ways of the curriculum to differentiate: your context, your process, or your product. So in your differentiation, you want to choose one of the 3 areas of the curriculum to differentiate. You can differentiate according to the context, which means the material that you're going to use to help students access information. It could be the level of material. In my social issues unit, which I've talked about quite a bit, I have like 8 different novels that students read. Everyone is reading about the civil rights era, but the different novels are at different levels. You could be using different materials to access information. Maybe some students are looking at it through a picture book or anthologies, and then there's another group that's reading magazine articles and another group that's looking at graphic novels. Think about my genre studies. Focuses on fantasy, but students can choose their own fantasy book as long as it has the basic elements of fantasy. Stays true to the curricular focus. They're all practicing the same skills, but doing it in different materials. For your ELL students, you could provide different levels of scaffolding and allowing different reading speeds by controlling the reading with the same focus as the rest of the group, which is best for these types of readers. You could differentiate according to the process. You have the most control over the process of your curriculum. Basically, that's the instructional strategies that you're going to use to teach the lesson unit concept and have the students access information from. You could have different activities to teach the skill or concept. You could vary how you're teaching the concept or skill over time, but no single method works for all students. So you need to make sure that you are incorporating different teaching techniques and different teaching strategies to get your students to understand. And for your ELL learners, varying methods gives them the opportunities to practice different speaking, listening, reading, and writing skills. You can also differentiate according to product, and this is their demonstration of the knowledge. So you can give options of how they can demonstrate their learning. I've talked about the tic-tac-toe boards. You could do some independent book contracts. In my genre studies, I often allow choices in which questions they can choose to respond to. When they're creating a presentation for the research, I let them brainstorm ways that they want to present their research. For your ELL learners, a written product might be outside the linguistic capability of these students, so offering choices accommodates those language proficiency levels as well. So another way that teachers differentiate is according to the student, what you know about your student. Use that data, use those surveys, use what you know about your students to drive your instruction. You can differentiate in 3 different areas with your students if you choose to differentiate according to students. You can differentiate according to your curriculum, your essential learning outcomes, or you can go and make it student-driven. So you would look at their readiness, interests, and their learning profile. So the 3 main student areas to differentiate for are readiness, interest, and learning profile. Readiness is knowing where each student is at, the depth of where they are at learning-wise. You can control the pacing of what they're doing. And then know when they're ready to move on. You can look at their ability, how they interact socially, the maturity level of your students, the awareness, their background. So your readiness, you could arrange students in heterogeneous or homogeneous groups for the lesson or unit, having leveled activities to complete. You could use different quick assessments, thumbs down, to understand the readiness of students so you know where they are ready to move on to or where they might need to get some repetition in. Look at those exit slips to know who's ready to extend their learning and who needs reteaching. Looking at the readiness is great for ELL students because it's about knowing and understanding their linguistic capabilities once again and their content knowledge. And using different types of assessments can reveal a lot about content comprehension. You can look at student interests, allowing students to research a topic of choice. Allowing for personal book choice. We've talked about how much choice can be such a motivator for students. Choosing the project or their product that is going to demonstrate their learning based on their interests. And this can create authentic real life connections. And you know that you've seen authentic assessments, real life connections over and over again throughout this course. And then that in turn becomes very highly motivational. When you value student interest and have an expectation for success, you will see positive results. In your ELL learner, the equation of student interest and high expectations are typically doubled with connections to their homeland, culture, and interests. So that is a plus for your ELL learners. You can look at your students' learning profile, meeting the students where their strengths lay, and once again, using a variety of approaches when teaching. Those three main intelligences, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. If you do a survey, you should match your teaching style with the strongest modality with your whole class, or even if you put them in small groups according to their learning profile. Remember, with your ELL learners, visual support is the number one support that they can have. Kinesthetic learning also helps ELL learners to make strong connections for recalling and triggers the brain. You want to make sure with your ELL learners that you're making it relevant to their lives and making it authentic so that it sticks with them more. So the keys to success and differentiation is knowing your students. Your essential objectives, your ELLs, SLOs, whatever you want to call them, should be evident to your students. What is it that they should be learning, and how by the end of the lesson will they have demonstrated that? For example, some teachers have learning outcomes, what they should know by the end of the lesson or unit on their board or on their wall. Myself, I use study bookmarks for the end of the unit assessment on whatever work that we're using for that unit. I will have my learning objectives written right on that information that I hand out to them. So remember, differentiation is not more or less, it is learning differently. It's the use of those essential skills to make sense of and understand key concepts and principles, which is the focus of learning. We're going to switch gears here quickly and explain a process of constructing a unit called understanding by design, or sometimes you might hear it referred to as backwards design. In UBD, there are some main components, and I have them listed here. You have your essential objectives, your ELOs, SLOs, whatever you want to call them. They should be evident to your student. It should be written in student language for them to easily understand. They need to know what they should be learning and how they should learn it by the end of the lesson. Inclusion is a big thing, making sure that all learners have the same objective. You need to make sure that you're accessing their prior knowledge so that everyone can come to the table with the same ideas, eliminate any misconceptions. UBD involves differentiated instruction and making meaningful, authentic assessments. What does UBD do for teaching? So what does UBD do for our teaching? It gives objectives that are known to all learners. It allows you to create activities and assessments that are authentic and provide a deeper connection to their learning. And because you're working backwards, you get rid of the unnecessary activities, those worksheets, the busy work, and your pacing tends to flow better and planning is easier. As you design your lesson, continual reflection happens as you decide if the activity is actually needed to help students understand, or is it just that busy work that we need to get rid of? And it's easy to shift gears when you're using UBD and change ideas because the focus is clear. So your students aren't going to know if you flip-flop something. If you know something is going to work better for your group, those teachable moments come up, change is flexible. What has UBD done for students? The expectations for the lesson or unit are known and they're expected to meet those objectives. It has raised the bar and communicated what it is they need to know. The focus is on depth, not breadth, and students come to a deeper understanding of concepts, which raises their confidence levels. So in UBD, it starts with thinking backwards. Your first step is to think, what is the learning goal? What do you want your students to be able to do at the end of the unit? What do the students need to get there? What are those activities? What do you need to teach them so that they can achieve a learning goal? And how can you make instruction efficient, effective, and meaningful? How are you going to infuse those best practices into your teaching? So the first step is to choose your unit, and it's best to start with your favorite. I'm going to walk you through how I used UBD in order to create my social issues unit, which focuses on discrimination and the civil rights movement. This is the cover page that I use for my reading journals. I differentiate this unit with different level books that I match to my readers based on their ability and interests. And I also have some single copies of books as well, because I find that students I have some students that will read all these books and want more. At the bottom of my cover page, I have objectives for the unit, or for the novel, which is part of the unit that I use in teaching my social issues unit. And it also gives them an indicator of what will be on the final assessment. Your second step is to create several essential questions. It's best to start with 3 to 6. So think of that bullseye format that I mentioned earlier. What are the 3 to 6 essential things that your students need to know and come out of this unit having a solid understanding of? Shouldn't be less than 3 ideas, and it shouldn't be any more than 6. And keep in mind that your target is that at least 80% of your students are going to master those essential questions. So this is my bookmark that I created for preparing for their assessment on the civil rights, my social issues unit. And this has my essential questions in student-friendly format for the written part of the summative assessments. And then they can see the main parts of the final assessment. And all of these tie back into what they did in their reading portion, and also in some of the research and the activities we did before we started reading our novels. The next step is to answer your own essential questions. What is mastery? What do you want them to be? How do you want them to be answering these questions? What is it that they need to know in order to successfully show you that they have understood the unit or lesson? So this is what I knew that my students needed in order to be able to meet those essential learning outcomes that I had previously created in step 2. I know they needed background knowledge, information, definitions about important people and events, and have some understanding of what the civil rights era was all about. I needed examples of discrimination from all the novels in 2-column responses so that they can keep track of the examples and then talk about them in the final assessment. Students needed to know themselves very well. They needed to know their personal role of how they would react to some of the discrimination that was happening to the characters in their novels. So by understanding how different characters dealt with issues in their novel, they can then put themselves in those characters' shoes and decide, how would I have fought against this discrimination? Would I have been a passive participant? Would I have been a peaceful protester? Or would I have been more of like a Black Panther type of person? I also knew that I needed them to be focusing on different types of conflict every other reading day so that they could really understand the different kinds of conflict that they'll encounter. Your fourth step is to roughly create a summative assessment. Remember, summative is the culminating assessment, the mastery of everything that has been learned in the unit. This was where you can create projects with choice for multiple intelligences. In my social issues unit, I do have a written test, because sometimes that is how students need to show me what they learn, especially when they're reading, but it's not always paragraph writing. I have them writing a letter. I have them just jotting down notes. But then I also have a creative component where they need to find a quote that they feel really encompasses the civil rights era, and then they can create a t-shirt, a poster, an advertisement, a commercial, any idea that surrounds that quote that they chose that they feel really reflects what their characters went through or what the civil rights era was all about. But I have a variety where students are matching ideas, they are creating constructed responses, short essay, and then they're creating this creative component, this project. So many different ways that students are displaying their knowledge. Your fifth step is to work backwards. So you think about what knowledge, skills, concepts, learner strategies, and vocabulary will the students have to know in order to master those essential questions? What concepts does each student need to know? What skills do students need to use? And what learner strategies will each student use? So on my cover page in my journal, I had chosen that these were the things that my students needed to know. They needed to be able to choose appropriate reading strategies to help them better understand and remember the story. And we had practiced those in the beginning of the year with our mentor text. They needed to analyze and identify social issues and instances of discrimination that were happening in their novel through personal reactions. So that would help them in explaining what their role would be, how they would have responded to some of these things that were happening. What would they have been, the passive participant, the peaceful protester, the Black Panther type of person. I knew that they needed to be able to make connections between background knowledge and their novel. They needed to realize that knowing this background knowledge, knowing this information about civil rights should help them to better understand what is happening in that era of their novel. They also needed to identify and explain the text structures and the different types of conflicts within their novel. And I had done some instruction on text structures and types of conflicts in the unit before. We spend about a week front-loading information for this unit. Some students have extensive knowledge on what happened during the Civil Rights era because of conversations at home, the depth that their previous teachers had gone into about the topic, or their own personal interests. But in order for my students to be successful, I needed to ensure that they are all coming into the novels with the same level of understanding so that they can think critically about what is happening in their novels and come to deeper conclusions. So I separate students into 4 different groups, and I do this heterogeneously sometimes, and I do it homogeneously sometimes. It all depends. For example, in my inclusion class where I team teach with special education teachers, sometimes I group some of the special education students together so that the aide can sit with them and work with them. And I typically give them the Montgomery bus boycott, their Birmingham, Alabama church bombing, or I give them the information to find out about the Children's March and Crusade and Martin Luther King Jr. Those seem to be topics that most students have heard about and have some background knowledge on. So I want to give those special education students the same kind of playing field as everyone else, where they kind of already know about those topics and they just need to make sure that they are gathering the right information. So I have students in 4 different groups. I give them all the books that they need. I give them a couple days in the hard copy sources, and then I give them a couple days of internet research in order to answer these questions and really get to know their events and their words and their people. And then what they do is then they teach the rest of the class about their topic. So they can come up with a keynote, a slideshow presentation. Some have done interviews, some have done posters. So I get a really good variety. I let them decide it because it's a group project. It's a collaboration. But I know that this is something that they need to know and really to understand what happened during this era and what these people and their characters had gone through. So your final step is to look at daily objectives. So it comes down to what I have them focus on and discuss within their novels with partners or groups. I complete status checks every few days. I have what I call graffiti walls, which is basically butcher paper that's up in different places in the room where they can comment on their novels and have written conversations that can happen with students in different reading classes who are reading the same novel. I read and comment on their reading packet and journals every single day to see where their thinking is heading and if they're understanding what's going on in their novels. I match students with novels, which they can access through differentiation, and all of these supports happen on a daily or almost daily level. Support is given to the umpteenth percent, and the ultimate result is what the student will put into it. Thanks for hanging in there. I know it was a long presentation.
I hope that you were able to glean some ideas from this information, whether it be differentiation, utilizing multiple intelligences, or thinking differently about how you plan a lesson or unit. They're all ideas for best practices.